Welcome to Fuse Podcast, where we spark change through conversation. I'm Sarah.
My name is Yatin.
And today we're talking about mental health. To start out, let's state that mental health not only affects your emotional, but also your psychological and emotional well-being.
And it affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices.
Today we're going to talk about how mental health relates with religion or other moral ideology. What impact does violence or past trauma have on it? Does relationships with family members or pets help? Let's take away some of these stigmas that hinder us from having an open conversation about it.
Our special guest for today's episode is Dr. Martinez. She's from Mexico and working on mental health from a long time. Thank you, Dr. Martinez, for joining us. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. I've been here in Missouri State for 20 years, since I was a kid. I always say that I came here as a child, but I love it here. This is my home, but I have been away from my family for 20 years. I teach in world languages and cultures. I enjoy teaching. That's my passion. That's my love. I'm from Monterrey, Mexico, a big city, and I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I have struggled with mental health and gone through some processes in my life that have triggered some problems that I have had to overcome to be able to really be here now, open talking about it.
Thank you for sharing that with us today. As you see in this episode, our conversation is with somebody who has experienced mental health, illness, and has a lot to share and educate. We would like to ask the listeners to wait for a future episode when the medical side of the conversation will be discussed.
Mental illness are among the most common health conditions in the United States. More than 50% will be diagnosed with mental illness or disorder at some point in their lifetime. 1 out of 5 Americans will experience a mental illness in a given year. Mental illness is not only more common than we may think, but also can affect anyone.
I guess I've struggled with it since I was a teenager. I really was feeling a lot of hopelessness in my life, and I didn't talk about it much. So I think that's one of the issues, that we don't talk about it until you are at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of a very dark tornado. That's kind of how I describe it.
You kind of discussed that you have had some mental health illness in the past, and is there suggestions or ways that you use to overcome these mental health illness?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that I had to go through a lot of back and forth. At first I didn't recognize it. I just felt sad, and or that I would just didn't have the words, to really recognize how I was feeling. I think one of the things that helped me, it was that later through the years, I accepted first, that I had an issue, but it took years. This was a journey. But then, I talked to different guides in my life. I talked to advisors. I talked to my pastor in my church. I talked to therapists. I talked to different people until I really, understood that it's a complex situation where you have to really draw from many areas so that you can be healed in a way and maintain yourself in that situation, because it's an illness. So then, I call it chronic, not because I'm always sad, but because I always have to be aware that I have and mindful that if I feel some triggers, I can say, okay, it's time for me to rest, or it's time for me to have to take a break.
There are people outside I know, they are suffering from depression and they don't even know about it. Mm-hmm. They think that it's a part of their life.
Yeah.
So do you remember some incident of your life when you said, okay, I'm going through something?
I have a teenager. One day he told me, you need to do something about your mood. You need to do something about yourself, because it is affecting us. And, it wasn't, now I had an adult who was telling me that, what I was doing was impacting his life. And we lived together, and he's looking up to me, and I thought, I have to get very serious about this, and I think that's when I really looked for more than therapy. I looked for a psychiatrist, and that's when I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and that's when I took it. When I took different medications that really have changed my life.
I know there's some like stigmas against medication, and sometimes people view you taking medication as like a weakness, not something that actually helps you.
Yeah.
But you would say that you would suggest it to other people as well.
I'm comfortable saying that I take medication and it's okay, and I do better with it, and I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I think that if you need something and there's help, just like I need my coffee in the morning, I think if you need medicine to feel better and to perform better, why not take advantage?
We also wanted to ask you, so you talked a little bit about your faith and how you had this spiritual leader that was telling you that you like weren't strong enough, that you just need to believe harder.
I think especially if you're a leader, like you're saying, you're gonna pass some ideology to the people that trust you, and I think you have a responsibility to be informed. You have a responsibility to be educated about topics, and if you are not educated and if you don't know some topics, maybe it's better to refer people to somebody who knows. Maybe he could have told me, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but you should see one because they deal with mental health. I deal with spiritual aspects, but they, if your tummy hurts, he can still pray for me, but he would send me to a doctor, right? If he saw me with a broken arm, he would send me to the hospital. So if you see somebody with if you hear somebody with a mental health, or crying for help, I think you should send them with somebody who deals, with mental issues, because that's what they are for. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with, going to therapy and, talking to somebody and taking medications.
I would like to hear more from about you, the impact of violence and trauma in your life, and how you particularly dealt with it.
I always say the good things. Why I came to Missouri. I met my husband here. I got married. And in Mexico, I was an attorney. I had just graduated, but I was really. And my mother is a very accomplished woman. She used to be a senator in Mexico. She works now for the president of Mexico. And people tell me sometimes, well, why don't you go back? You had a great life there, and I did. But honestly, what actually happened is that my mom and my siblings and I were experiencing domestic violence, very, 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 very severe domestic violence, something that it's indescribable. And so one day, we decided to escape. And I was young, and I was the oldest, which means that in my culture, if you're the oldest, you take care of your siblings. So once I saw that my siblings were okay and my mother was settled, I thought, okay, I also need to look for my own path.
We have one last point that we wanted to talk to you about. We've talked about how mental health affects like psychological and emotional well-being, but it also affects social well-being, especially with like family, relationships with like workplace or other personal relationships. Would you say that as an educator or just like with personal relationships, you found that depression has affected those?
Yeah, especially in the Hispanic community, I always say you don't have the right to be depressed because, you have, if there's a quinceañera or if there's a party, you have to attend and you have to greet the cousin of the cousin of the cousin of the cousin of the cousin and smile, and it's for me, it was very hard in my community because we don't talk about that. So there was like a point of intersection, in the Hispanic community plus the Christian community. It was very difficult because when I did when I isolated myself for a long time, people think that I was ghosting them. I learned that. See, that's a new word that I learned when I got, you're ghosting us. What does that even mean? You're going MIA, or what is it, like missing?
Missing in action.
Yeah, yeah, you're MIA, and I learned those words because people would tell me those things, and I thought I just don't, I no. And now, there was a point where I lost a lot of friends. I had to leave the church that I was attending because I, couldn't attend all the events, and I didn't feel like I was understood. So I ended up attending a different church, that is not, maybe they don't speak my native language, but I feel that they get it, that they're always loving, and that's all I want. I don't want to be judged for not going to an event.
We interviewed students about mental health, and we want to know your thoughts, Dr. Martinez. But before, let's consider some statistics.
The Healthy Minds study provides a detailed picture of mental health and related issue in college student population. According to 2021 data, Winter-Spring Report of Healthy Minds study, an annual survey of mental health on American college campuses. While 38% of students said that they were flourishing, 41% reported experiencing moderate and major depression, and 34% anxiety disorder.
13% of the students made a suicidal ideation, while 23% reported a non-suicidal self-injury. 30% of students received mental health therapy/counseling during the period of the report, but including psychiatric medication among students with positive depression or anxiety, the number goes to 52%. Based on these statistics alone, Dr. Martinez, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I think that it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because I've gone through the same situation, and it breaks my heart that somebody can be thinking that they're not gonna be missed if they leave. Suicidal ideation, or that somebody's so lonely or feeling so hopeless, that they're not alone. I wish I can do something. That I guess that's the only purpose that I'm sharing my story, because some of my students shared with me that sometimes they didn't want to wake up, or that they didn't want to come to school. But one other thing is that after COVID, I saw last semester a lot of my students struggling with mental health, and I know my kids. I know how they look, and I know last semester it wasn't about academics, and I think we all came back a little bit broken after what happened with COVID. We've lost friends, we've lost family, we lost time, we lost events. We had a lot of losses, and we had a lot of uncertainty, and that of course causes a lot of anxiety. And if you have mental health illness, on top of that, you add COVID, it's even worse. And so I think, the data, what that is telling us is that this is an urgent thing to talk about, that this is an urgent conversation, that this is a must, that we should really not just, not just be there for people, but really be active about it, be proactive.
Right. I think not only this data, if you compare last 10 years, there's a jump of 30% on all these mental health issues. And that is, I think, more concerning. Do you have any comments on?
Well, I think now we have social media also. A lot of the things have changed in the world. We compare ourselves with others. Like you said, there's a lot of pressure. I remember experiencing when I was in grad school, that was, when I hit bottom, because, there was a lot of pressure on performing well and doing well, and for college students, like you're saying, especially if you're first generation, and sometimes you don't know who to talk to about your experience in college. That's one thing. Or if you're from an underrepresented group and feel isolated, that's another thing. So everybody has a different experience in college. That's why, I think it is important. Again, I use the word reach out. In other words, to get out of ourselves, to bring people into the common ground. because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We have that common ground that brings us together. And when we feel that commonality, when we feel that community, there's a lot more sense of belonging and a less sense of hopelessness.
Now let's jump in with the interviews. We asked some questions to students on our campus. They had or have experienced mental health issues. We asked whether they feel they have information about mental health. Let's listen first to an anonymous student.
To be honest, I don't have enough information about mental health because mental health changes day by day. Sometimes you could be peppy one day and the next day down in the dumps. So it all depends on the day and the person.
I think he's talking about self-knowledge, right, Dr. Martinez?
I think so too. And I think, like he's saying, it's a journey. It's a journey. And one day you can be fine, the next day you can't. You might be, it depends on the person, and it depends on the circumstances too. So I think, as what I was talking about at the beginning, right now I love to feel in that balanced way, like stable. And but I had to learn about it. So I think that's what he's talking about.
We also have another answer from Ulysses. He answers whether he has enough information on mental illness as well.
I think I have too much information about mental health. I think this current culture, at least like a campus culture or just kind of the youth culture, there's a real consciousness about mental health, at least superficially, and maybe not in a good way.
What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think sometimes when we say not in a good way, maybe we don't have, like I was saying before, the right education or the right data or we're not informed as we should be. So we just, tell people, things like positive vibes only, or let's work out together to get rid of the bad. We don't know how to address it, and I think that's why there are professionals, that can really address this: psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists. Because if you give it to the wrong person, then they might give you the wrong information. So I think it is very important that we, as educators, or as somebody who is a leader on campus, I think it's my responsibility that if I have a student who shares with me a situation, it is important that I understand that I'm not a psychiatrist, that I'm not a therapist, and that I refer that person to the right professional that can actually help, because I don't want to do more harm than good, even with well intentions.
Okay, another question we did was related to being comfortable talking about their own mental health issue, friends or parents. Let's listen to Gabriel and then Ulysses.
I would not feel comfortable talking to my family about it. I've never talked to them about it. They don't know that I've seen a psychologist or anything like that. I've told my closest friends, but even that I was scared to do, because you just don't want people to view you weird or think that you're weird or emotional or something. So I have sought help, but I would really only tell a couple of my close friends.
When I was younger, I was only really comfortable talking about it with friends. But luckily for me, I have good parents, and I've ameliorated my relationship with them, and I've gotten to a point where I feel comfortable talking about those things with them.
Again, I think it's a journey. I think because of the stigma, I relate to both of those answers. In a way, a lot of the times you feel judged, and you feel oh, you're very emotional, and just forget about the drama, or just let it go, And I think it's okay to be emotional, I mean, we are humans who have feelings. Why are we not gonna have emotions? Plus, I think of the word emotion, and I really think of the word motion. That should lead you to be active, to do something. So once you recognize your feelings, your emotions, what motion are you going to do? So then, to me, we have this narrative in the world that it's bad to show emotions, that it's bad, to share, to be vulnerable, or to share, oversharing. We have that word, you're oversharing.
For my friends who have depression or anxiety and also identify as male, it's just harder for them for some reason.
Well, that some reason is the ideology that you were talking about at the beginning. We have a patriarchal ideology, right? So men, there's a poem, I teach literature, and there's a poem that it's called by Alfonsina Storni from Argentina, and it's called Men Don't Cry, and it says, my dad told me not to cry, my grandpa told me not to cry, they told me not to cry. So it's, it's inherited. We have this narrative that, males are supposed to be this way, subjectivities, and females are supposed to be this way. So it's, in a way, more acceptable sometimes that a female would cry, not at work, but maybe you can cry with a friend. But males cannot even, cry with friends or anybody. They should be emotionless, and I think that's another thing that we have to break,
We asked one more question from students. We asked students if they seek professional help and why, also if they know when to do it. We have an answer here from Gabriel, and then we have another part to it as well.
I saw a psychologist. They gave me medication like right away. And I started it, and like I feel better, and like I still take it, but at the same time it just seems like a really shortcut like way to fix it, and I feel like I would rather not take medication. I would rather like figure out what I need to like help myself cope, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. Like I was saying at the beginning, it's a journey. In my case, I discovered that I had also, a lot of trauma from the past, and I had to deal with that. But it took me half of my life. It took me a midlife crisis to recognize, okay, I need to address what happened to me, as a child a long time ago, and to my mom and my siblings, and how this affected me. But I think it's a journey, and it's a process, and it's finding the right person. When I was in Mexico, I was kind of looking for different therapists, and it was hard to find the right one. It's like finding the right match. You have to be comfortable with your personal choices.
Nowadays, a lot of celebrities are talking about their experiences with mental health issues. It is important that people know that they are not alone. The actor Dwayne Johnson once said, "I found that with depression, one of the most important things you can realize is that you're not alone. You're not the first to go through it. You're not going to be the last to go through it."
Mm-hmm. That resonates a lot with me because in my family, my dad had depression, and he's a brilliant guy, and he just started taking medication a few months ago, and I wish he would have addressed that when he was younger, a lot younger, but there was such a stigma that he didn't. So in my line, there's something maybe, genetically or something, but I know that I'm not the first one, and I know I'm not going to be the last one, but I know that I'm not alone, and I know that there are resources.
It is true that our mental health can change over time. Being aware of that helps to increase our self-knowledge, which leads me to ask you about self-care. How have you overcome and have fought depression? Could you share with us more of your experience and strategies?
Mm-hmm. I think, like I keep saying, it's a journey. One of the things that it's important is for me to recognize the triggers. When I feel like I've been overstimulated, it's a word that I've learned too. When I know that I'm overwhelmed, when I know that I'm taking too much, there's too much on my plate, I need to learn to make priorities, and, sometimes I need to say no to things. And not care about how I'm gonna be perceived, because the society has put so much pressure on you and perform in different ways, and sometimes you just have to draw a line. But the main thing is I try to recognize the triggers and then make a pause and say, okay, I need to stop here and take care of myself.
Just like you were saying, Dr. Martinez, like even the smallest acts of self-care in our daily life can lead to a huge impact. Following what we were talking about, the National Institute of Mental Health gives us a list to get started. If somebody that is listening says, I don't know where to start, here's a small list for you.
Get regular exercise, eat healthy, regular meals, and stay hydrated. Make sleep a priority. Try a relaxing activity. Set goals. Practice gratitude. Focus on positivity. And stay connected by reaching out to your friends or family or members who can provide emotional support and practical help. The National Institute of Mental Health website gives us some tips on when to seek professional help. If you're experiencing severe or distressing symptoms that have lasted 2 weeks or more, such as difficulty sleeping, appetite change that result in unwanted weight change, struggling to get out of bed in the morning because of mood, difficulty concentrating, loss of interest in things you usually find enjoyable, inability to perform usual daily functions and responsibilities,
Please don't wait until your symptoms are overwhelming. Talk about your concerns with your primary care provider, who can refer you to a mental health specialist if needed. So we want to thank you again, Dr. Martinez, for sharing your story and experiences with here on the Fuse podcast. Would you like to share some final remarks?
Thank you for inviting me. This is the first time that I share, that I disclose a lot of information. I'm doing this out of love. I hope that this helps somebody that is listening. And thank you guys for starting this project and for having this conversation. And like you said, this is not the end. We can keep talking.
Thank you again, Dr. Martinez, and you all that are listening. See you guys next time.